Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Sloan the Record, recording and publishing on March 2nd, 2025. My name is Nathan Sloan, and joining me as usual is my father Ron. Each week we're going on the record about family history, and along the way we'll see if we can't learn more of the people, traditions, values, and stories that made us, all while opening a window for everyone else to see a slice of life in rural North Carolina. New episodes are published on Sundays, and we appreciate every listener. You can make sure that you don't miss an episode by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or the Podbean app. Hey, Dad, are you excited to take a mental trip back to the 1970s with me today?
Why not?
So last week, we had a special episode. It was all about my experiences as a new father to Ronan. And that episode, I haven't talked to Dad about this, it actually had a record number of listeners. I was surprised at the number of listeners. I always thought maybe we'd get 5 to 10 close friends on a good episode that would listen to one of our podcast episodes. But apparently we have a lot of good friends out there. So thank you. I want to say a very big thank you. It's humbling to have so many folks take your valuable time to listen to our little family stories. So, Dad, say thanks. Be polite.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Dad doesn't care, but I care.
Appreciate the interest. We really do. And especially with the grandchild, you know.
Yeah. I mean, the rest of this podcast, and that's something that I wanted to say, if that was your first episode, you may be kind of surprised to learn that most of the episodes of this podcast are a chronological history of Dad's life. It's not always baby information, but you know, he's also more interested in the baby episodes probably than these other episodes. But I'll dangle a carrot in front of you. At some point during this episode, I'll give a baby Ronan update. So if you like the baby information, we will do that. But for the rest of the episode, we are going to be picking up where we left off 2 episodes ago, which was Mom and Dad as newlyweds. We want to basically go to the start of your careers. What was newlywed life like? There's a lot to cover, so let's get into it and move as briskly as we can so we don't run out of time. So first question, you and Mom got married in the mid-70s, and there was a good amount of time there before you started having kids. Mm-hmm. What stands out in your memory about that time of life?
Wow, it was just really getting to know each other and have time with each other. You know, we lived pretty far apart, with her being in Four Oaks and me being in Lillington, and limited access to a car. So it was just really nice having that time with her. And, you know, I got a car and she got a new car.
Just to clarify, do you mean that when you were first married, you lived apart for a period of time, or are you talking about before you were married?
Yeah, I'm talking about before we were married. So those first few years of marriage were, you know, getting to know each other and really spending time with each other. And it's different when you live together and nicer, you know. So
how many years were there between when you got married and when Elizabeth came along? Wasn't it 5 years or so?
It was, let's see, we got married in 74 and Elizabeth came along in 78. So it was 4 years.
And where did you live at first? Did you move around? Did you have several different places that you lived, or did you kind of settle into one place?
Well, we talked about, I think, in that episode that before we got married, her first year of teaching, she moved into an old family home there in Lillington that 2 older women lived there that had grown up in that house, the Bird family. And we lived there the first year and a half, and then we decided to build. And because she had never lived anywhere but in town, we were planning to build out in the country, and I wanted to make sure she was happy being out in the country. So we rented a little farmhouse, really like a little tenant house, I would call it. It must have been well over 100 years old, up on top of a hill back off the road. There near Mamers, and we moved into that and kind of fixed it up, and we lived there for probably 3 years until we bought the house here in Four Oaks. So
the house in Four Oaks was a house that Mom had admired growing up because it was right across the street from the house she grew up in.
Correct. Correct. It was the Tart home. It was built in 1919, same year my mother was born.
Okay. So how did you find out that that house was available?
Well, we like I said, we were fixing to build. We had a contractor lined up. We had a construction loan cleared. We had the area that the house was going to be done on the farm staked out for the footings, and we found out, as I told you before, that she was expecting, and we were not expecting that because we'd kind of given up on it. So we just put everything on hold and said, let's get the baby here and see how things go and then move forward. And sometime after that, her mother called us and told Susan that Miss Tart had passed away, the lady who owned the house that Susan loved over here in Four Oaks. And, of course, we went to the funeral, and then probably a month after that, her mother called again and said, I just found out today that Dr. Tart is going to sell the house. And she said Dot Laster has it listed, who was someone she knew and Susan knew. And I told Susan, we can't do that. That would, put us too far from my work, to you too far from your work, and it wouldn't make any sense. But I owe it to you to go look at it. As much as you love that house, I owe it to you to go there. So we came over on a Saturday, and we got an appointment with the realtor, and we came over and went through the house. And after I went through it, I realized that I was planning, the house we were planning to build, I was planning to finish it. Like the upstairs, we weren't going to have finished to start with. We were going to live in the downstairs bedroom, and I would finish the upstairs myself. And I looked at this house and said, well, I could, get in here and build the cabinets and put in ceramic floors in the bathrooms, and I could spruce this thing up quite a bit. And we could be here about 3 years, and then after about 3 years, we could go back over to the farm and sell this and have some more money to put down on the farm. And so we came over here and walked through, and seeing all of that and realizing that, I put money down on it the next day, and we moved forward. And it's, as you mentioned, it was right across the street from Susan's mother's and father's home, and diagonally across from her grandmother, which with a new baby coming, that was kind of nice. We put the money down, and I began coming over here working on the house in the evenings, trying to get it ready to move in. And we loaded up a Mayflower truck, and they brought us over here, and the plumber was lined up, and I had paid him in advance to get all the plumbing working. And we went up to unlock the door for the movers to bring us in, and there sat the toilet in the middle of the hall floor where he had not set up, and my wife 9 months pregnant and a lot of pressure on her bladder. So if we hadn't had her mom across the street those first 2 days, I don't know what we'd done until we found another plumber and got things going.
So Elizabeth had not quite arrived yet by the time you moved in?
No, not quite. I think it was early November when we moved in, and she was born December the 7th. Yeah. So it wasn't a big overlap.
You ended up in Four Oaks. What was it that changed your mind about the house so much, and how did you feel differently about it once you got there?
Well, it certainly wasn't the ease of it, because when we moved in, we had nothing in the kitchen. I cooked in the dining room with hot plates and skillets and things like that, electric skillets, until I was building the cabinets myself. And so I got the kitchen cabinets built. I turned the kitchen into a shop. So it was a gradual investment of time and getting things. I wanted to be true to the heritage of the house and the look of it, and I didn't want to remodel it. I just wanted to update the the living facilities and get them, functional, but still keep them in the same look. And I couldn't find a cabinet company that could build cabinets that looked right in this house. So I designed and built cabinets myself. And I would come over here at night. I'd leave work, come up 95, 40 miles, go in and work on things till about 9 at night, and then go back to Mamers and Susan. She was still teaching then. And so that was kind of a nightly routine, and I'd come over and work on the weekends. I laid ceramic floors and put wainscoting in the bathrooms and installed a tub. It had clawfoot tubs in it, one of which I saved upstairs. They had a butler's pantry between the kitchen and the dining room, and turned that into a into a laundry room with a little half bath. And I didn't change a whole lot on the house in terms of room use or structure. The back porch came up into the house and had a separate staircase that went upstairs to an exterior door. And I enclosed that whole area that came into the house and put another entrance just like the front entrance. And we opened up that stairway and took out the wall and all upstairs and made it all open to the downstairs. So I did some things like that, but made the house very livable.
Well,
and I love the house. I love the look of it. I love the feel of it. Then when you ask why our plans got changed, it's really my fault, I guess, because I'm so sentimental. And when Elizabeth came along here, so many memories were all of a sudden attached to this place. Of bringing the baby home and our first Christmas with the baby. And as the other two came along, I just got more invested in it. And I liked the little town, and I really, really liked the separation from work, because my work was a very fast-paced, deadline-intensive. We were in a modern office building at that time, and it was like two different worlds. So I'd get in the car, and 40 minutes later, I was in another century almost. With being in this 1919, it was sort of a cross between the Victorian and the Classic Revival. But it kind of gave me a separate world to live in from where I worked. It was easier to separate those two. And Susan had always loved the house, so there was no pushback there. But in years later, she told me that she would sell it and move to the farm over there with Mom and Dad. But all of a sudden, I was the one that wanted to be in Four Oaks more. I take root pretty quickly, and especially it was, it's a good community, good people, and there again, I wasn't tempted to go back into work at night because work was 40 minutes away, and a little bit closer in Lillington, but not a whole lot. That probably wouldn't have made a lot of difference.
So you mentioned work, and so we're going to focus a little bit more on that. And you also talked a bit about how Mom was still a teacher around the time that you moved into the house, and right before Elizabeth was born. So that means that she was a teacher for 4 years at that point. What do you remember about her career as a teacher in those early years, and how she was doing, how she felt about it? What did she think about being a teacher?
She enjoyed it, I think. She was teaching 6th grade at Anderson Creek, which is outside of Lillington. The kids really liked her, and I would go by her school every now and then, on my way home, or she would forget something, and I would bring it to school and drop it off to her. She was in a mobile classroom outside, so it was real easy to access, and she was about the prettiest thing you'd ever seen on a school campus. And, she had 6th grade, which is 11, 12-year-olds, And that's about when little boys start noticing how pretty girls can be. And it was funny, she would tell me these funny things these boys did to get attention, little awkward things that little kids would do. But I could tell the way she talked about them and different ones, how much she thought of them. You could tell she really cared about the kids. And I loved seeing that with her teaching career, how she cared about them and how she really wanted to make life better for them.
I know that she took some time off from teaching, at least when I was born. Did she take time off when Elizabeth was born?
When Elizabeth was born, she took off some maternity time, but then she went back to teaching. And we found an older couple, Granny and Papa, they called them, that kept children during the day. And they were really nice. And, I would drop Elizabeth off there on my way to work. Susan had to go in a lot earlier, so I'd get Elizabeth up, get her dressed, and get everything together and pack up her stuff and take her to drop her off. But she would hold on to me for dear life. I mean, I said she retracted her landing gear when I tried to set her down on the floor. She'd bend her feet up like, I'm not going to stand up here. You can't put me down, And I tell you the truth, it doesn't sound very manly, but several times, more times than not, probably, I left there with choked up and tears in my eyes because it was just so hard to leave her with her arms stretched out wanting me, right, and not wanting to leave me. And so after a while, I just told her, I said, I can't deal with this. I said, we got to do something so that you can be with her. And so that's when I really decided with my career. I was pretty happy at work. I just did what they told me to do. And, I got to do a lot of illustration work because I was hired primarily for my illustration skills. That was what made my portfolio really stand out, was the things I had drawn and design work I'd done. They'd give me stuff to do that I like to do, and I'd just do it. That was pretty good, pretty easy. And then I realized, I told her, I'll turn up the volume at work and show them what I can do. I've got to do something to get moved up where I can make more pay and get to where you can stay home. So through that summer, I really turned it on while she was home with the kids. And, there'd be a project going on that was in the concept stage that I knew about. And I would come home and work up some concepts and some layouts and things like that and bring it in. And then the creative director would go, oh, hey, this is pretty nice. And then he started assigning things to me. And to go, instead of coming in and telling me to do this illustration or to lay this out, he would come in with the beginning on the job and ask me to get started, to take it and come up with some concepts and things. So I started working that way and really focusing on that and my turnover on things, the turnaround time, and showing I was hungry for more responsibility. Then one of the artists there was leaving, and I said, told him I could handle, what he was doing if they would increase my salary to compensate for that. And it was kind of a slow go, and it didn't, when Susan stayed home, it wasn't, an immediate easy street. I said I could have won the Price is Right every time because I knew the price of everything in the grocery store, from dishwashing detergent to Zesta crackers, in which rolls of paper towels had the largest number sheets and all that for the money.
Paper towels are the most confusing thing in the grocery store still today.
Yes,
There's no
they are.
like easy way to tell. It's always like 3 rolls equals 5 double rolls, or double rolls equals 26 rolls. And I'm like, what is a roll? How is this a unit of measure?
Yeah.
It isn't. I guess there's square footage, but then they want you to do like long division to figure out which package size is bigger than the other. So
Yeah, but I went through all that. I went through that going, okay, there's so many square feet on this one. And now they've got how many sheets there are, but they started doing half sheets, which is pretty good. I mean, it actually saves. But I could have won the Price is Right if I could have gotten on that game, because I got really good at it. And, you know, Melissa came along, what was it, 16 months behind Elizabeth. That brought another element to that. But during that time, I really just got better and better at what I was doing, and enjoyed the creative side. And then at a point, 2 of the owners were having difficulty with the owner that was the creative director, and they decided to part ways. Well, one of them came to me, the guy that was the account executive who did the sales and was the face of the agency, came to me and asked me if I would be interested in partnering with him. That he said, I've got to get out of here. I can't deal with this anymore. And so he went to tell the other partner that he was leaving, and that partner said, no, we'll get rid of the third guy. We'll move him out. Don't you leave me with him. And he said, besides, why do you want to make Ron a partner when you've already got him here as an employee? And so that part that I was kind of excited about fell through.
I want to make sure that we're staying on track here for time wise, and you're kind of already bleeding into your career anyway. So that's one of the main things that we wanted to cover with this episode. I've heard you mention Kane Allen Smith. Was that the 3 owners? Kane, Allen, and Smith.
Kane Allen Smith.
And so you started working there with them right out of school, or was there?
No, my first job was with a group called Coalition, and they had offices in the downtown or Motor Inn. The end of that property had an office building, and had some really, it was an interesting time of life. The art director there was a guy named, or the creative director named Bo Coyle, Coyle, and he was from Washington, D.C. He had been a partner in I just had it on my tongue, but it was 3 names. Coyle and Cuniberti were the last 2. But he had seen this job advertised, and he came down here and joined that group. And they were advertising when I came out of school for a graphic designer, and my dad saw the ad and told me I needed to at least go talk to him. I wasn't really interested in going towards Fayetteville, but as he pointed out, need to get a job. So I went down there and met the guy, and I got the job. And it was an interesting job. I really loved working with Bo Coyle. He was just a great person. He was very creative. He was kind of a Renaissance guy. He could do anything. He made his own telescopes and ground and polished the lenses. He was a really good painter. He could do woodwork. And so I learned a lot besides the craft. And things that I learned from him in graphics, I still apply today, to styling and how I work with type. The other thing that was interesting there was there was a photographer on staff, and he was just really an unusual character. His name was Tom Savini, and you would have never, I've said many times, I'd have never bet a nickel on him. Very talented, but he was just out there. And I find myself still, he was very entertaining, and I still find myself saying things that he said. He had all these little one-liner things, little quips that he would say. If the phone rang, he'd say, "Oh, get that, it might be the phone." Instead of it might be my girlfriend, he'd say, Ooh, get that. Point to the phone. Get that. It might be the phone. This little off the wall crazy things that I enjoyed him. Now he enjoyed theater. He enjoyed movies, and especially horror movies. He liked horror movies so much that he named his only son Lon Chaney Savini, if you can believe that.
And I'm sure you're leading up to this, but to anyone listening to this who is not aware, Tom Savini is a famous makeup and prosthetics artist for
Special
horror
effects
movies. So Dawn of the Dead in 1978 being one of the ones that I guess was a breakout for him. So
that was his first one.
You knew him before his big break, essentially.
Mm-hmm. I did plaster cast on his face for him to do his prosthetics for makeup. Halloween, I said, was the only religious holiday that he celebrated. But when he did things like Halloween, you just would not believe what it was like. He had a dentist make him a set of slip-on canine fangs, and he had some cape and everything that he ordered from Romania, an antique suit, like tuxedo type thing that, it's just like something Bela Lugosi would have worn. He was a photographer, so in his house, he would set up strobes and have them triggered and play this spooky music. So when the little trick-or-treaters came to the door, he had a thing rigged up where the door would open by itself to this black room, and then he'd fire off all these strobes in sequence like lightning. Uh-huh. And he'd have that haunted house music from Disney's Haunted House playing. And these kids would just bounce up and down on the doorsteps, where they saw he'd be there, with the cape out and his fangs down, and everything. He had a widow's peak made into his hair, and he was Italian, had, jet black hair. And he had this widow's peak woven in, he'd put in with mortician's wax. And it must have been traumatic for these kids. But he made life
imagine going trick-or-treating and what would end up being a Hollywood special effects artist is there to scare you specifically. That's that's pretty crazy. You got to know him at this first place that you worked?
First place, Coalition. And he and Bocor were really the ones.
And then how did you end up from Coalition?
Well, Coalition, the guy that owned it, I think he may have been from Canada, but he was up north. He loved hockey. To put it mildly, he loved hockey. He was obsessed with hockey. And there really wasn't any hockey down here at that time or rinks, but I think Hampton, Virginia had a rink, and he ended up buying a hockey team, the Hampton Gulls, and had me do the logo for it and everything, but it was not a good move. And he poured all the money out of the agency into that hockey team, and it drained the agency down and got it to where, he was having to lay people off and let people go. And he got it down to where everybody was gone but me and him at one time. And it got to where he wasn't making payroll all the time for me. In fact, I left with him owing me about $1,600. And I wasn't making a lot of money then. That represented several weeks of work. And so I just realized, I'm slow to change. I was comfortable there, but I got uncomfortable when the money wasn't coming in, and I was having to do several jobs. And so I went out, put my portfolio out to this group that had splintered off from the oldest agency in Fayetteville. Two of the guys, the art director and the account executive, left there and got a financial partner. Alan was the financial partner. Al Kane was the creative director, and Gary Smith was the account executive, the salesperson. And
so to everyone who was not aware of the terminology that's been used, like the account executives and creative directors and art directors and all that. So this is an advertising agency. And that's, as you mentioned in your college episode, I think, kind of figured that your skills in illustration and art would most readily apply to commercial art and advertising. And that's how you ended up with the first agency, and then eventually Kane Allen Smith. And you've just shared with us how it sounds like Smith and someone else didn't like the third one. Smith and Allen kicked out Al Kane and started what would become Smith Advertising and Associates. Is that right?
It became Smith and Allen.
Smith and Allen. How long was it before it became just Smith Advertising?
There was a lot of unusual circumstances that came up. I began to. Allen was he was probably 10 to 12 years older than the other two, and had an oil business where he had a distribution on an oil distribution for housing, fuel oil for houses on Fort Bragg. So he had a good business and made a lot of money, and so that's why he had money to invest and go in with Gary on it. But it wasn't long into that he and his wife divorced, and he went out kind of on his own. And then when Gary and he parted company with Al Kane, and wanted to keep me on board, I stayed there with them. And then Allen didn't show up to work one day.
You were saying, so he didn't come into work one day.
Yeah, people couldn't get up with him at home, and someone went to his house, and he had been murdered. So all of a sudden, we were in the middle of a murder investigation, which I'd never even known of one, much less been involved in one, with the police coming in and questioning you and how well did you know him? Did you spend any time with him and all this stuff? And it turned out that it was a affair gone wrong, but to our shock, it was an affair with another man.
So maybe that's why the marriage evaporated.
And I had suspicions and even talked to Gary, because I said, it's not normal, just not normal for a man to be so negative about women. And whenever we'd have problems at the office, he would say to Gary something, well, what do you expect hiring all these women? Things like that. And I just thought, it was enough of those comments, but, it went through my mind, but I didn't really give it a lot of credence, but anyway, he was murdered, and then it was Smith Advertising and Associates.
Smith Advertising at that time, was it in an old office or a modern office building, or was it in the place that I remember when I was a kid?
It was in a modern building. And one day Gary said to me, how about going to lunch with me? I got something I want to show you. I want to get your opinion on it, your advice with it. And I said,
Gary Smith's the account executive that owned Smith Advertising.
And so we got in his car, and he drove down Arch Street, which was less than a block from where our office was. And it had one home on that street that was just, I would just go look at it. I've always had an interest in architecture. And it was a mansard roof house that had like a copper arched mansard roof on it, and beautiful side. I think a guy named Earl Bandy was the guy who did the restoration on that building, and he did it unbelievably. It was just, it looked like something frozen in time. It was just beautiful. And I would actually get lunch sometimes to go down there and just sit across the road and look at it. Well, this house was right up the hill from that Gary pulled into this driveway. He said, "I want you to look at this house." And it was a Victorian, much like my house. And he said, "I was looking at this lot here I saw the for sale, and I thought it was the house that was for sale, but it turns out it was the lot, but the house was abandoned." So I got up with the owner of that, and he said, "I can buy the empty lot and the house." But he said, "I have no idea on earth how to go about doing something like this." And he said, "I've seen what you've done to your house and restoring it." And he said, "This is right in the same genre as that." And I thought, if you could help me restore this thing and how to do it, I've checked into it, and I can get some tax incentives, tax credits, and some grants and things like that because it's a historic building. So that was what kicked it off. And I was like, sure, I'd be good at that. I'd enjoy that. So we took that on. And we took the siding off and put new cedar siding on it, which we stained instead of painting so that it looked like paint, but it wouldn't peel. And we put sawn cedar shingles on the roof. We restored the door. Norman Jernigan and I built all the railings and the post and everything to go around the porch. Norman did most of the work, but I helped assemble it and do things like that at night, and inside and out. He built a custom-built octagon table to fit the conference room, which used to be the dining room. And that's the one you remember coming to. And my office was up at the head of the stairs upstairs. And so, the Fayetteville Observer did a full-page feature, well, actually more than a full page, on the house and the restoration. They came in and photographed it inside and out and did this big thing on it when we opened it up. And so that's where I was and worked until I left.
At least 20 years of your career was spent there at Smith, which now that agency no longer exists and the building no longer exists that you just mentioned. I actually one day when I was working with Fort Caswell, was in the area and decided I wanted to go back and see this house because on a couple of occasions they had a bring your kid to work day. And so when I was very young, I remember going to this house, and it was just a neat house. It did remind me a lot of our house, the style of it and everything, but it was just bigger, and it had been converted into an office. And so there was all sorts of neat things everywhere for a little kid to run around and explore. And I pull up to where the office is supposed to be, and that house was just completely gone. There's still the brick sidewalk that would have led up to the front of it. And as I'm sure we'll cover, not in this episode, but in a future episode, it was not a pleasant parting for you with Smith Advertising. No. And I kind of thought to myself, well, okay, Dad's probably going to be happy here that this place that he left and did not appreciate the way that it happened and the way that he left. Now it's gone. It's all rubble. It's been torn up, and he gets the last laugh. His business is still going. But that was not your response at all when I told you about it. And you went right back to those memories that you had of working with Norman Jernigan to make the posts and all of the siding work that you did on it, and the table that was still in there, and your artwork and projects that you'd worked on for clients that were stored in the attic. And you're going, I wonder where all that stuff is. And that was just kind of surprising to me that was your reaction to it.
Yeah, it was sort of like part of my life was gone with no trace of it. I don't know what was still in the building. Had I caught them tearing it down, I would have saved those baluster railings and put them around my porch here for two reasons. One, Norman turned them, and Norman's no longer living, one of the best friends I ever had. And two, they would have been beautiful with this house. And like you got a little guy coming along now. He could have played on the porch and you wouldn't have been afraid of him playing out there because of the railings around it. And I had planned to do that anyway, raising my children, but life got in the way and I never did. So I just stayed on guard when y'all were on the porch. But yeah, it actually saddened me. And, I left a lot of things there because, when I left there, it was clean out my desk and I'm gone. And a lot of illustrations that I did, a lot of original artwork from other artists like Randall McKissick were still there, stored up there. And, and I was just thinking, did an excavator come and claw through all those files and put them in a dumpster? And, what happened to that table of Gary's? Did somebody have enough sense to figure out how to take it apart and get it out of the room and save it? And he made all the chairs in there. They were Chippendale chairs, handmade, solid mahogany. Gary had a hand-built desk in there and credenza and chairs. There's just so much stained glass windows that I had made. It was just so much went into it. And it's just like a ghost. But it was almost like fate or something that Gary, and the way he went out, had hurt so many people that it was almost like every trace of him being there was being erased, almost like it was denying that he or anything he had existed, because he at that time had disappeared.
So there are obviously some negative emotions attached to Smith Advertising now in hindsight, but while you were there, what was the bright spot, or were there bright spots to your time there? You were there for roughly 20 years.
Oh, yeah, there were a lot of great things. I loved my work. I loved the people I worked with. I had staff that I had hired in my department, for the most part, became dear friends. Renee Thomas Snell was the art director. Patsy Crawford was one of my art directors. Dave Witter was one of the account executives that I thought the world of. There were just so many different people. Kathy Bird in media. But we had a great team, a very creative team. We won almost every account we went after. We got Pinehurst Hotel and Country Club, and we were going up against agencies out of Virginia, huge agencies. We got the Mills House account away from Peter York in New York, I believe was the name of that agency. We just were having a lot of success. Gary was very skilled in communications, and he was very bright, and he had a lot of good ideas. And he and I worked really well together when his focus was on advertising and the product and what we were doing rather than lifestyle. But when the focus shifted away from the product and the relationships onto lifestyle, and the relationships from the lifestyle, is when things started unraveling. Resources from the agency were being threatened by expenditures, and that led to some pretty tough things. But the thing that I enjoyed the most was the success we had, the accounts we worked with. As I mentioned, the Mills House, which is a beautiful hotel in Charleston, South Carolina, that was existing when during the Civil War. In fact, was hit by a shell from Fort Sumter. I love that. Love taking Susan and the girls. In fact, I was down there working on something when you were, right before you were born. She was almost 9 months pregnant and took the train down there to meet me and ride back with me. But it was exciting to work on accounts of that caliber. And we entered a lot of competitions. In fact, that's another thing, I guess, went with the building being torn down. We entered the Addies, all these different competitions We won the Meetings Conventions magazine, had a contest, and we won the best slogan for Myrtle Beach called, for meetings and conventions, called "You Ought to Meet Myrtle" was the slogan. Mm-hmm. And that beat out I Heart New York. The I Love New York, it was in that same competition and beat that out. We had 2 national Addies, which are really hard to come by. And we had over 800 industry awards, from local Addies to regional Addies to, district Addies, regional Addies, and national Addies. But to have 2 national Addies, and the walls are just covered with all these awards and things.
Yeah, I seem to remember, if I'm remembering correctly, there was a desk in the main entry, like a reception area, mm-hmm. and then there was the main staircase. And as you went up the main staircase, there was just all these awards plastered all over the wall. And then, was it your office was at the top of the stairs to the right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sounds like you had a large body of work that you're still, even if it's been destroyed by a backhoe and thrown into a dumpster somewhere, you still carry the memories of it. And yeah. I'm sure that there's some kind of poignant life lesson there in not also getting too tied up in your accolades that you get in the world, because you never know what's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you still hold on to those memories of those accounts and jobs that you did, and it has to be, well, I know from working with you now, it's a good feeling when you go after a job and the client entrusts you with it and you knock it out of the park and they're really happy with the job that you did. Yes, of course you work for money, but the thing that keeps you going is being good at what you're working on and feeling effective in it. So it sounds like you still have a lot of those memories and that you carry them with you still today.
Yeah, it was a lot of good times there, and I know, I remember one of the things that stood out in my mind, I think about quite often, and I wonder about this man if he's still around. It was probably one of the most stressful times for me in work because we were pitching Sarasota, Florida.
Like the Visitors Bureau?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were pitching the travel and tourism for Sarasota, Florida. And there were a lot of agencies pitching it. And we put together the presentation, and we had really sunk a lot of time in putting it together. And we were in the plane flying down there. Gary said, well, we've got about $30,000 rolling on this in terms of time that has been invested in this presentation. And how this goes is up to you because you're presenting the creative. Well, that's not what my gut needed to hear before I was going into this thing, to hear it looked at as you're responsible for all the money. If you don't get it, you've blown all this money. But I always liked I didn't like putting on pretenses, just be me when I'd go into these things and meet the people. I enjoy talking to people a lot, but I don't enjoy being in front of people. And we were setting up, getting everything ready, and some of the people that we were going to be presenting to came back into the room. They were taking breaks and going out, and this was one of the members of the tourism board there in Sarasota. And he was a guy, I'd say he was probably well into his 60s, and just an average-looking grandpa-type guy, And he came in and he walked by me and said, how you doing? And I said something like, well, not great right now. I'm fixing to do this presentation. And, and it's a lot on me, for, just hoping I can do it justice with what we put into it or something like that. And he said, well, let me tell you something. He said, every one of these people, he said, I'm one of them that you're going to be talking to. He said, every one of us, we put on our pants one leg at a time just like you do. He said, these are just average people. I'll tell you what to do. He said, you seem to be able to talk to me all right. And I comfortable talking to me. And I said, yeah, I am. And he said, well, you just make this presentation to me. You can look around, but you make eye contact when you need to. You make eye contact with me. You just talk to me about it because you seem like you comfortable talking to me. So just do that. And so I did that. And I looked at others in there too, but I'd always come back to him and he'd sit there and smile and he'd wink, like that was good, those sort of things, It was encouraging. And that was one of the best experiences in my career, topped off by the fact we got the account. And we maintained that account till I left the agency. So that was one of...
Well, that was very kind of a stranger to do, to kind of coach you into being able to do the public speaking.
I think I told you one time, I know I did, Melissa, before a job interview, I said, just realize that as much as you're hoping you'll get this job, they are hoping just that hard that you'll be the person they're looking for. And and that's what I realized with this man. He was hoping that I would bring in and come forward with just what they needed. And so he was pulling for me. You always think about it as like I'm judging me and looking at me, but that kind of turned my thinking on how I looked at going into presentations, as realizing that they're just like you going to look at a car to drive it. You're hoping it's going to, fit you perfect and be exactly what you're looking for. And they do that same thing. So it was just it kind of changed my attitude about the presentations and going in and trying to get these jobs.
So as I mentioned earlier, some of my earliest memories are of being in that big old house at 321 Arch Street. The house, I can still sort of like walk around in it in my mind. And I couldn't have been 6, 7 years old whenever I was there, maybe younger than that. I'm not sure. Maybe I went when I was a little bit older than that, but I still remember things about the way it smelled and the break room and getting a moon pie and these kind of memories that I associate with it. And your office was very neat. Kind of reminds me of a junkier version of Indiana Jones's office, because you just had stuff everywhere, and to a kid it was really interesting, the kind of stuff that you kept. I guess little fragments or pieces of jobs, and the neat table that you had in there, and it was a disaster though. You had, just like it is now, you had stuff all over your desk and everywhere, but it was just kind of a neat space. You've already talked about the stuff that Norman Jernigan helped with on the house and how you helped get it put together there in the early days of moving into that space. But are there any architectural features or places in that building that were especially neat to you, or that you were enjoyed being in, or just Easter eggs, things that you might not have noticed unless you worked there for a long time?
There were some things that were incorporated into it. I worked it out in the floor plan to put a private bathroom, sink and commode in right off of Gary's office, and the little transition hall into that office, off of his office, had a space for a window, sort of like the windows we got upstairs at the back of the house. And I put a stained glass window in there, and it was just sort of, when you went in that was a little short hallway. When you went in there, it just seemed kind of like, kind of cool, because all that colored light was coming in it and everything. I like that. We got a really nice old grandfather clock and had that in the entrance. You probably remember that. And it sit there and tick, tock, that slow tick and tock.
Yeah.
And we had a fireplace there in the entrance. That was kind of cool, a corner fireplace. The conference room was probably my favorite room because it had a bay, 3-window bay on one end, and then had a corner fireplace. And on the other corner, opposite the fireplace, I built in a cabinet to put a television in, but I built it reminiscent of the mantle that was in the other corner. So it carried that over, and it made the room 8-sided. Three, a bay at this end with windows, a bay at this end with the fireplace door and the cabinet. And then we made the table to fit it perfectly to that 8, to those 8 sides. And it would seat, gosh, it was a big table. It'd seat about 16 people. It would, you could get a lot of people in there. But I love that. And I liked my office, like you said. I liked it. It had a fireplace in it. And I had that little seating area, with that table that was made up of the old wood block type. And, I enjoyed the whole space. The only downside to it, if there was a downside to it, was I lost that separation of going home to a different world, because my surroundings at home and my surroundings at work were so much alike.
Very similar.
I carried a lot of
That place was built, I think, in 1910, according to what I found on the internet, and your house was built in 1918. So very similar style houses, but that was just a lot bigger and converted into an office space. But that house definitely had a lot of character to it, and made an impression on me. So that's why I wanted to ask that question. Well, we're out of time, but I'm sure that your time with Smith will crop up again in one of these future episodes, and we can talk more about that. But I did promise a little bit of baby Ronan update, so I want to throw that out there before we wrap up. Listening back to the episode from last week where I talked about how was I doing with the challenges of parenting, I now feel I have been humbled. He has humbled me. Because I have reached my breaking point on a couple of occasions in the past week. Just about, he's doing cluster feeding more and more. It doesn't seem to be getting any better. So from like 9 p.m. to midnight, it's, I could watch a feature length movie, or I could tend to his every need constantly for that window of period. Of time. So definitely, as much as you love your kid and are excited to be a parent, in those moments, it is very trying. My patience being tried in ways that I have never had my patience tried before. But at the end of the day, we get through it, and he finally goes to sleep. And I've never been more grateful to be able to get a little bit of sleep myself than after some of these challenging nights. But he's doing well. And Emily's doing well. And hopefully we will have Emily here soon for a bonus episode covering her first month of motherhood. So
great.
Listeners, stay tuned for that. Dad, do you have anything else you want to say, parting words before we end the episode?
No, just that where we set out on this, with you realizing you were fixing to go through some parallel times with the baby on the way to what I had gone through. And it's just... it's neat to kind of relive that sweet time of life with you. I know, like you're saying, it's trying, but you'll be surprised how the really difficult things will just melt away, and you'll be left with all these really sweet memories and experiences. And I can
one thing
see
that's not really parallel is that you were having your first child when you were about 10 years younger than me. And at the same time, you were one-upping your career and then coming home and building cabinets and laying tile in the house. That seems insane to me. It's seems like you had quite a lot of talent that I would love to have access to as well. Yeah, I'm doing good to get some internet cable run around my house right now, let alone building cabinets and laying tile. So I'm impressed by the different things that you were able to do as a new dad or just before becoming a new dad, and the drive and the motivation that you showed there in those early days to step up in your career and be able to keep mom at home, raise a new baby. So we'll see if I'm able to step up to the plate and do something similar here at 10 years of age older than you were. But I definitely get the motivation and where it came from. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode, and we'll see you back here next Sunday with a look at Dad's having kids, all three of them. We'll recap those experiences and take a look at the 1980s in general. So don't miss it. We'll see you then.